diversity and inclusion is a very, very important topic in the world, in business, sports. What does diversity and inclusion mean to you?
Oof. Oh, people have asked me that question so many times, and I've done probably like 1 billion panels on it. And like co-founding an Asian American creative like nonprofit has been really revelatory for me because you see it through different lenses, right? So for me, diversity and inclusion really just means like no longer being a subpar part of the conversation and just being a main part of the conversation, right? Like there are so many tentacles to the way that like this problem has kind of manifested itself when you really think about the socioeconomic factors, historical factors. I know you're in Canada, I'm in the US. We've had kind of a fraught history across the board with many different racial groups and even like genders. We've all been through a lot. I think that it's getting better. And when I think of like what I define diversity and inclusion as, it's really just no longer being this like out outsider sect of people, right? Or just like marginalized. Because we should always be part of the conversation. Like if you look at the stats about, the US, like we're growing to a multicultural nation. We were already on the way there, right? But, in just a few short years, white is not going to be the dominant. And it's pretty interesting to see how advertising has also become very multicultural, right? Like you see mixed race couples, you see children of different backgrounds, because people want to see themselves reflected in the things that make money. And ultimately, like when we're part of the conversation as the money making sect, as the money making group, to me that's when we've been included. And diversity is just really thinking about how representation manifests itself in anything that you're doing, right? Because representation could be a lot of different things, right? There's a lot of different groups that want to be seen and heard. If anything, TikTok has done a really amazing job at bringing the one weirdo at this side of the world that's exactly like you, bringing you together so that you guys can actually kind of chat and build community and actually see somebody's perspectives that are completely different than your own. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's an evolving concept.
I love that you say that because there's a lot that you just said there. There's some I'm gonna unpack because it's like the dominating race, is white, prospectively. You know what I mean? Some people could look at it as subjective and whatnot, but then also at the same time, it's like you speak about interracial relationships that are happening a lot, right? Blacks, whites, whoever, pick your flavor. You know what I mean? It's all different colors of the rainbow, ice cream, things like that. But with that said, it's like I feel like and I think the conversation happened a lot pandemic season, right? Social media, George Floyd, but I think it goes beyond that. You know what
Oh
I
yeah.
mean? And things like that. Visible minority. And I think that now I would say the conversation is now being spearheaded now when it should have been 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. You know what I mean? So why do you think? You think it's because the what we experienced in pandemic and the world slowing down completely is why we were having these conversations?
I mean, when did the world ever have a chance to really sit back collectively and reflect
True.
and have time to think about it? I think these conversations have always been happening, right? Like, and you've had a lot of people who have like radicalized thinking, which, some people think of radicalization as like a derogatory term. I think it's like everyone should be fucking radical. Like, everybody should really, like, deep dive into thoughts, deep dive into history, and understand like what brought us here, right? Because we don't want to repeat the past. Um, I think there was a very unique cocktail during the pandemic. You had people who had the entire world standing still in one place, having nothing to do but think, really drunk, really high, really reflecting on a lot of what was going on. And I think that, like, when you actually look at what happened with, kind of everything bubbling up around George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement really taking flight across the world, right? It wasn't just in the US. It was interesting to kind of watch a lot of different countries that hadn't addressed colorism across the board really start to kind of reflect on those things because there's black people living outside of the US.
Talk about it.
Shocker. Right? Like sometimes, we have a North America centric way of looking at things, but seeing those takes, seeing, a lot of what the UK was going through is really interesting too. Um, I think that during that time, right, we had one place to speak, and that was social media. And the power of social media cannot be negated, right? Like, I've worked in marketing for a very long time. It was really interesting to see what took its own life during that time, right? Like these movements, these requirements. I worked for a huge brand during that time. And this was my first time actually working for a global brand front line, being the voice. I I gotta say, I was challenged with problems I would never have thought a brand would have to address in an actionable way, because brands just weren't responsible for those kind of things in the past, right? But what you were seeing to me is really a cultural shift in the way that like we have that we're communicating, and like a cultural shift in the expectation of communication from not only people to people but businesses to people, and the ability to go more business to consumer has really changed the way that people invest their money in a good and a bad way. Right, like, we all get scammed by like these, especially as a woman, I get scammed by these cute little dresses in China that take about like 20 years to
Eight
get to
centuries
me.
to get to you.
Yeah, and I get it, and I'm like, this isn't how it looked on the model. This isn't what but also in the same right, like people are gonna invest their money in businesses that reflect their values. And it's been interesting as a marketer to kind of see how it blew up and burst really quickly, and everyone was an expert. But then here we are a few years later, right? And what really speaks is that financial and energy investment. So when companies are saying, oh, DEI and all these things, we're really invested in the community. Well, the question is, what was your long term plan? You
Hmm.
could have put out a statement on social. Social's great, right? Like it rallies people, makes people think. But how are you long term investing? And when we were in that moment, I always knew that that was going to be the real telltale sign as to whether or not people or businesses were really invested in this change. Because the one thing during the pandemic that we all learned is that we have to invest to change things. And it was a good reminder if you look back to like, a lot of the protesting and riots that were happening in the 60s and 70s. It was the first time in a long time that we had to take to the streets. And I enjoyed seeing that actually, because I'm very, I'm into politics. I'm into like exercising your civic rights, right? But it was really important that people actually had a reckoning with that a bit. And it will be interesting to see in the next few years how many people keep it up.
No, no, I like that you say
It's,
that.
it's a lot of energy to keep it up.
Yeah, because I feel like the big thing I want to focus on is we're on social media, Twitter, Instagram. You have the other platforms, TikTok, and things like that. And I feel like it's leads to the element of stepping out of business, but more in the entrepreneurship, content creation world, creating more impactful leaders. What are some ways that you think the audience that are listening to this right now can create more impacting leaders in diversity and inclusion outside of corporate America or corporate Canada?
I mean, it's weird. It's become all one, right? No matter what, like your social media presence will always be who you are to a job at this
It's true.
stage, right? It's really become something you have to think about. And I'm actually kind of inspired by kids, like the younger generation, who are just like, we don't give a shit. We're going to keep voicing our opinions. And if you don't care, if you as an entity, as a job or a corporate entity don't care, then we're going to find a way to make money without you. And I think that that's actually a weird power shift that hasn't existed in a very long time. And really has put a lot of companies on blast. Now we're kind of seeing a little bit of the pendulum swing because the market isn't amazing right now across the board. We're seeing a lot of people, tech companies, other companies too, just like heritage brands. You would never think people get laid off or getting laid off, right? And I think like there's this interesting push and pull between redefining what it is to be a professional today and your professional capability and showing up as who you are, right? Like I show up in sweats and red hair, and I used to have piercings, I got tattoos, like, and I don't care because I'm gonna fucking kill it every day. And I love that about now, because there was a time where I worked in the music industry and I didn't even feel comfortable showing up like myself totally, right? And that was one commitment that I remember, like being young and being like, man, I don't want to work at that shop. I was in a band. I'm like, I have to work it. Fine, I'll figure it out. But then like making that commitment to myself to not sell out in whatever way that made sense to me, I think has been interesting, because you're always going to sell out a little bit to compromise it, unless you're completely independent. But believe me, even when you're independent, and this because you freelance, right? You're still kind of bound to someone's rules and you're bound to someone's check that's coming in. So
True,
it's a push and pull, right? Like
to a
it's a
degree,
pull. Yeah.
to a degree,
Um,
and yeah,
totally.
yeah. For me, it's like you still work in the corporate world, and it's so funny because podcasting is this blooming entity that's taking over the world to replace radio. It's replaced a whole bunch of different things, right? If it's not podcasting, it's audiobooks. If it's not audiobooks, it's podcasting. And I think one of the biggest things you have to kind of watch what you say when you're still attached to a brand. But in a way, it's funny because your peers, your coworkers, your bosses know exactly what it is you're doing, what you're saying. They may not actually say something to you, but they're paying attention
Yeah.
because they want to see what's he saying. And
How are you handling
sometimes,
it? How are you
right,
handling
and sometimes you can, how do I say this? You can step on toes, but then you see how it is and people react to you.
it?
And I've always said is that freedom of speech shouldn't be a thing that we're running away from. All right. It's the extreme talking points that I think get lost in the message. And we see all these content creators and things like that have these strong talking points. Like, look at the news, political. You know, you got Tucker Carlson, you got Don Lemon, whatever, right?
Lemonade time. Yeah.
You see what I'm
Lemon.
saying?
Oh
And
my
these
God. Yeah.
and these guys are getting ostracized from a brand because they have different perspectives. You can't go on a podcast, say what you want to say, and then go back to your 9 to 5 and think they're going to be like, they're going to go, okay, that's what you're doing.
Well,
But it's
especially if
like,
it's a job, right?
exactly.
Or shit talk management, which is what Tucker pushes like many times, right? But I get, look, two shades of the coin, right? Like two completely. You're either going along with like conservative rhetoric, or you have like ultra liberal rhetoric. But the one mistake they both made the one mistake they both made was a lack of emotional intelligence as to how your point of views travel to the people ingesting it, right? And not even the people ingesting it like the audience, the people your short-term audience, like your peers, right? The people managing you. Like it's one thing to have a point of view, which I think is always welcome, especially if you're intellectual, right? Like you want to have different points of view. I want someone to challenge me always. I'm like, please tell me differently. Explain to me why you think that way, right? Like, and as a manager, especially, like that's a really important skill because we don't know everything. We don't know everything. I've changed careers a few times. I've had to humble myself to say I'm not really as proficient in this one area of this business as you are. And what's really been important is just being really emotionally intelligent. I'm very opinionated, but not
Aren't we
everybody
all,
needs to
though?
hear.
Aren't we
Yeah, but
all?
not everybody. Yeah, but not everybody's as vocal. I'm opinionated and vocal. That's a whole other thing. Like, not everybody's as vocal to a mass of people. And the thing is, like, it's keeping that balance, which also is what makes certain people great when you really
Talk
think
about it.
about it.
Yep, absolutely.
It's if you're able to get your point across, be intellectual about it, like not take the short win of being salacious in whatever way that may be. Um, I think that really is what made the OG journalists great, right? Like they were able to kind of sneak it in here and there, but they really didn't, like they were able to kind of keep that balance because that was the only career you had, right? There was no podcast, there wasn't like these other avenues where we can actually make money these days. So yeah, it's a tough balance when you're a personality, right? Like, and I'm sure you've been through this. Like, I've overstepped my boundaries a few times, but I've learned from that, and that's really important. Like it's really important to learn, and also like change what you're talking about, kind of like switch it up sometimes because maybe like the things change.
I've always said it can come from a part of selective outrage, right?
Hmm.
And I feel like if you're strong in your talking points, you're gonna always offend somebody, right? You look
Sure.
at sports, you got the Stephen A. Smiths and Skip Bayless, they say something about LeBron, and all the LeBron fans go crazy on social media, right? But it's like even with podcasting, you could take one little, 15-second clip, piece it together, and have me out here sounding crazy. But that's just how life is. And then you got AI and then this other stuff that
Wait,
people can
well,
do all of that
yeah, they
too,
can make
right?
you up at
Make
this
me up
point.
if they really come down to it. But I always say is that I was in a conversation last night where it's like you have to you got to be able to collect everybody's different thoughts, but
Hmm.
never be on the back of your heels. as long as it's not too crazy and you're like offending people and you're triggering, people and whatever. But I think that we're so sheltered as a society that when people hear certain things, they feel it's about them, but it's like listen to understand and comprehend what's going on versus listen and then I want to start regurgitating. You know
Well,
what I
we're
mean?
still in a culture of me, right? Like that's the thing. Like that's the change in social media. Like I'm old enough to remember a time where we didn't have kind of that echo chamber. We didn't have people to kind of relate with in that way, right? Like you met the people you know, and that was it, right? Like that was the whole thing. So it's been interesting to watch how people become more me centric and want to tell the world what they think in a way that just didn't you didn't have that flat and plain in communication before. You had to get together with people, have a dinner, get in a few fights in order for you to actually get those points across. So it can feel very targeted because this type of communication is very personal, right? So when you're listening to a podcast, you're actually immersing yourself in the world, whatever that is, you're immersing yourself in that world. When you're watching a TikTok, you're kind of like listening to someone's point of view directly and inadvertently it's personal because you're consuming it one to one, right? Not one to many. Whereas like before, I was just thinking about this because of Jerry Springer, rest in
Mm.
peace.
Yep.
Like he was shocking and ludicrous and incredibly ridiculous, right? Like the things that he was bringing up, like nobody in mainstream TV was touching at that time, that point. You had like you had Jesse. They were just exploring really avant-garde kind of concepts in those talk shows at the time. It was like the late '80s, early '90s, but he took it to like the next level, right? And he got a lot of hate for that, for being trashy, etc. But like you think about it now, it's like we actually kind of honor that. We honor getting into weird shit, right? Like we honor getting into that weird territory. So in some ways, he was like a pioneer there, but he got all the direction funneled towards him in one way through like bad press or like bad whatever. Instead, could you imagine if that was flipped now, where we're like, hey, you could comment on all those things, you would have a completely different take on it because people are allowed to give their opinion, and if you don't listen, it's actually looked negatively as a consumer. Like I want somebody to hear my voice. Like community is everything, and that's been a big change, and I think the way that people perceive things.
I love that you say that because community is what's going to help you grow, right? And you have a
Totally.
community you can build on socials, right? And then I see some people not trying to say like, "Oh, I don't need to be on socials to build a community." And it's like, "What are you talking about?" Yes, you somewhat have to be able to build your community on social media. It's a way of age, you got your LinkedIn profiles. I feel like it's one of the most underrated applications that people don't really use,
Oh, I
right?
use it all the time. I hear you though. Like I think people don't realize like there's so much power there because you're dealing with actual professionals. Like each platform is based off the intent. Like people actually are there to learn more about work. They've done a great job. I actually think that LinkedIn has done an incredible job of building that kind of community because that didn't really exist before. Like you'd have to go to conferences. Like it wasn't again this flat and plain of communication where I can go like, oh my god, I admire the CMO of this company. I can actually comment. And maybe they'll see me, right? Like you didn't really have that opportunity before. But on the flip side, it's a little ludicrous.
No,
Like
so
you get
true.
a billion messages when you're like, hiring of just like, talk to me. Can I get 15 minutes of your time? No. Do I look like I have 15 minutes of time
But
for
that's the
miscellaneous?
the ones that are asking for the 15 minutes of time, like the big influencers, the money guys, things like that. You got to pay for their time. They say 1,500 to talk to them for 15 minutes, and people are like, "Well, that's a lot of money." No, it's an investment to your development. If you're
Totally.
not paying for your development, I don't know what you're doing. I really don't. You know what I mean? And I think that I get into a lot of these conversations a lot of times where it's like school is a great thing to go to. Obviously you got to go to, grade school to high school. Not everybody makes it to university or college, but there's certain things I think that you can, how do I say this? You can kind of leapfrog a little bit, right? Sometimes it's not that fancy little paper. It's about networking now.
Oh, it's
Really.
not.
You got to
It's not.
network, right?
I have a different take on college. Like I barely got through college. I'm an intellectual and an academic, but I don't give a shit about sitting in a room with people who don't know how to hustle as hard as me. right?
Talk about
But
that.
like I already had a job. I was already working at a record label by the time I was working in college. And I went on tour with my band and I was like, okay, I'll get this done because my mom's an immigrant and she's like, you got to graduate. And I did it. And, I had put all my eggs in one basket as a high schooler because I wanted to act and I wanted to sing and I had like these dreams of being on Broadway, whatever. So like I was like, this is what's going to bring me there. And when you don't actually realize, like, I love talking to the young ones because I'm like, you guys don't know. Just go out there and work. Like, don't even worry about school. Like, don't put so much investment in school because, like, you could go. I know plenty of people I went to school with who are not successful in their careers, who may have done a great job in college, but they didn't understand the value of that community, of actually building your name in the professional world is completely different. And I mean, it's different for different concentrations, right? Like maybe if you're a doctor or a lawyer and you need that academic background and you need to have that check mark to get those things done, I get it. But for me, working, in the creative arts and in marketing, like I got there not because of school at all. I got there because I learned on the fly and invested my time in my relationships. And that's one thing that they don't tell you, right? Like, and sure, some schools have great networking, sororities, fraternities. A lot of HBCUs have amazing communities where you're meeting other people on par with like where you want to be in your career. And I really respect that, right? But it's not for everybody. And you definitely don't need school to get where you got to go. And that's what Gen Z is showing us now. They're like,
Yep,
fuck
it's
this.
facts. It's
Go
facts.
make money. We don't
Yeah,
need
my thing is, and then this may come across to be a little controversial on my side, but a lot of people that go to school and then because they go to school, get and they graduate, they're stuck in what it is ever is they're doing. They
you.
don't look at that what they're doing to be that focal point to get progress them to the next level, like Super Mario Brothers. You know what I mean?
Level up.
It,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And you got to level up. You got to eat the mushroom or get the fire flower to progress through certain levels. Some people really shrink in spaces, and they shrink in spaces because they may be appointed, let me see, something in the workforce that is keeping them stuck, right? And I know the ones that are working that probably hear this are like, oh, where's he going with this? It's like, listen, everything in life that you're doing is a stepping stone for you to progress to the next level. If you really want to maximize your career, you have to use everything leading up to that. That's
Sure.
school.
And it may not be evident to you at that moment, right? Like
Exactly.
you may be like, why am I doing this thing? Or like you may actually your every failure is included in that too. One thing I'm a new kind of like management tool or device that I've been really keen on trying. I've read it actually in Sheryl Sandberg. I know people can think what they want about her, but she had an interesting book where she was talking about like different when Facebook's early days, right? Like how they would motivate people, and they talked about a failure resume, and I was like, man, people don't celebrate their failures enough
Talk about
because
that. Yep.
failures are really important in bringing you where you need to go in your career, right? Like every misstep is turns into a learning. And the only way that it really becomes a true failure is when you just don't learn from it and you don't reflect on it or post mortem, like what happened there. Like, so to me, like successes are great, or like even just stasis, right? Is great because you're learning little by little and you may not even know where it's bringing you, but it's bringing you somewhere to your point. But also failure in that because failure is extremely important. And like knowing your boundaries is really important. Like you were saying, like, people charging for their time. Hey, I can't hate on that. Time is money. Time is money. And whether or not it's time is money equaling energy, right? Because all of our energy isn't infinite. Our energy needs to be maximized in that time. And people forget that because everybody's trying to do the most. But when you're trying
Well
to do the
said.
most, you don't end up doing anything good, right? Like
So
you're
true.
just tired. Like we've all been there.
Hamster wheel, hamster wheel. Some people get taught, they get trapped in that hamster wheel. The continuous evolution of that wheel keep going, going, going. It's like when are you gonna get off that wheel, take a rest, and then realign the focus. If you don't get the picture, you got to readjust the frame. No,
Yeah,
you know
true.
what I mean. So it kind of looks at it with everything that we're talking about. We talk about communities and things like that. How do you build, or better yet, what are some things you use to build your communities to help you progress to the next level and whatever else you got or wherever you else want to go with your development and stuff like that?
I mean, it's meaningfully investing in connection, right? Like I tried to. meet up or reconnect with somebody either new or who I haven't seen in a long time professionally at least once or twice a week, right? Like it's you can't just be like working and then like, oh, I'll get to it when I get to it because it's part of the job. It's part of the job and it's part of being, it's part of learning for myself, like not even just part of like what I do professionally. It's part of learning for myself. Like every time I talk to somebody who I professionally respect or even like mentoring somebody, it really opens my eyes as to, into different perspectives. And ultimately like in marketing, in podcasting, in being a journalist, which has like been kind of like the scope of my career, host, whatever, you are storytelling and helping unearth stories from other people. So you almost got to have like a sickening love of creeping on people and understanding what makes them tick, right? But that's what makes you great, right? Well, if you can really translate that to consumers, or in my case now I'm working in gaming, into players, or even with artists, like how do we bring this artist story to the masses and how do we hook people by it, right? Because a lot of them have the same story. I can sing, but it's not, what makes the greats is always something different, right?
So true.
So I think like really helping to build community is really like starting to just understand who people are and investing in
Absolutely.
that and being a
Absolutely.
person of my word. I like, if I say I'm going to do something, I do it. If I can't do it, then I'm going to tell you I can't do it. Or if I'm not there, I'm not going to do it, right? Like, and it gets tricky and harder as my schedule becomes busier throughout my life, but I think being a person of your word really carries you a long way. Um, because then people know you're reliable. They know that you're somebody, of note to invest in, right? Because if you don't invest in people, why should they invest in you?
So true.
And that's one thing that people forget, because people are trying to, like, again, the LinkedIn approach. Let me cast a wide net. Let me DM as many people as possible. Let me, BCC. Like we don't. That approach just doesn't work. What's really meaningful are those one-on-one relationships, and I even in this day of like mass, just mass consumption, that's still the most important thing to me. And I think like building communities like what I'm doing with Asian American Collective has been really hand-to-hand combat. And people see the success of it, but they don't realize it's been like literally like, hey, you're Asian, I met you. You work in music or you work in sports or you work at an agency. Like, I love what you're doing. Do you want to join our community? And then people come out one by one, right? And they meet each other one by one. And then you see friendships, people getting careers off of what we're doing. And that to me is like that slow grind, that slow build is meaningful and it's connected because we're bringing them physically together in one place, right? And that's what's important, like really investing in that one-on-one connection.
I love that. I love that you say that. So, what is one way that you feel like marginalized communities can widen their net in whatever demographic they're trying to choose to
Oh,
navigate with?
support each other. Like I started an Asian American nonprofit. I am very conscious to say this is not just for Asians. If you're interested, you're curious, come in. Let's show you what we got. Let's show you what it's about, right? Like, and I think intersectionality, I know it's such a buzzy word, is really important. I'm like mixed race. I'm white and Filipino, but I feel very Filipino because I'm not, you don't look at me and say, oh, that's a white girl, right? Like, and I also think like, I've grown up in a very interesting from an interesting background, like, right, like I like am a rock chick who grew up in the hood and I sang, my voice was very R&B-ish, right? So like it was really interesting to see like people's assumptions of you, but like who you actually are. And who you are is like where you come from has a lot to do with how you kind of like live your life and how you mature, right? And you can evolve obviously, but I love that special spice about me, that like
I
if you
like
know,
that.
like she's from Jersey, she's definitely from Jersey,
Oh, you
right?
from Jersey? You
I'm from
from
Jersey. Yeah, I'm from Jersey. But I spent my whole career in New York City. So it's it's interesting. Like now being in a different career, living in Los Angeles, like you evolve, right? What was I getting at? What was I getting by? I'm just like talking about shit.
no, it's all good. It's free. It's free. It's free
Free
speech.
flow,
You're giving
free
us free
flow.
game. Free game.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? No,
nothing
no, for
stops
sure.
me when I start talking. But yeah, I don't like. I just think that people need to spend more time together, breaking bread, seeing each other's homes. Like invite your friends to dinner, invite people who you're unsure of to dinner. Like see what they're about, right? And that's the thing. Like, I'll hear a lot of I'll have I've worked in capacities and seen, been way outside of my depth. And when I say outside of my depth, it's like with a lot of white people, honestly. like in a way that I've never experienced, because most of my life has my friends have been minorities, right? And it's just been like this interesting open mix. But I realize actually on the flip side of that, I'm very uncomfortable in uber white situations.
Really?
I
Why
am.
is that?
It's just been a learning for me over the years because I was not raised with a ton of white people. Like that just it was something that it really clicked to me, especially going to college and kind of seeing completely different ways of living. That so that is the one benefit of college. I'll say that much. So you get thrown in with like a very wide net of people, right? You're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh,
Mm-hmm.
this is what happens over here. With okay, cool. It's been I'm okay now, obviously, but it's taken me a while to understand that like I just wasn't as comfortable as I thought it was. Like being around a culture that I didn't grow up in that was very white or very like rich, right? Because I didn't come from money and I didn't have kind of that background. And seeing that, I kind of felt inadequate at times, right? Going into those different environments. But you learn and you learn your value that you bring to the table and that nobody can see it through your eyes from that group, right? They can't understand, and that your value there is actually something that they're yearning, right? There's something they're looking to find. So I'd say it's like an insecurity almost, where I'm like, what am I doing here? Or like, why am I here? But that's been also interesting to me because I think it's been important to lend that olive branch and bring them into what I'm doing. And it's cool to see sometimes people who are completely on a different side of the spectrum being like, hey, I really do want to learn about, what you're doing AAC. They're always they'll be like, I want to really understand, and like what's happening to all of these people and black people included is awful. And I'm like, well, understand how it really affects us as people and how these things affect us as people. So really, really been investing the last probably 10 years of my life on bringing people together and making more people see each other's points of view,
Of
um,
course.
including those who would be a little unobvious to people like that. For me, it's been different. I just didn't grow up with a lot of white people.
No, 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 and that's the thing. You know what I mean? I think that being here in Canada, it's over the years. Me being in my 30s now, I'm sitting here looking at it, and I'm like, I've watched the evolution of the multicultural aspect happen. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And it's sometimes when you look at it when you were going to school and you get called a racial slur, it's one thing. And now it's like you see the development that's happening. Is it there? Yes, but a lot of people have to be more socially acceptable to what's going on. You know what I
Totally.
mean? And
That
it's
was the
like,
flip of the pandemic, like you were saying. That
yeah,
and now you being an outright disgusting racist or a bigot or whatever, like because there's many ways you could be biased, right? Um, doesn't fly, and people are scrutinized for it, which is a change, which is a big change. Like it's good. It's a
but
step in the right direction, at least.
with that, and I've said this on countless shows, there's a lot of virtue signaling that also happens also
Oh,
too.
sure.
You know what I mean? Where it's like you think it's one thing, but you see what it is, right? It's like I always say the selective politics or the selective outrage. You know what I mean? They pick it's like pick and choose what you wanna air light on or shed light on versus, oh, we're just gonna suppress that altogether. You know what I mean? And it's kind of unfortunate, but it's like we just gotta do better. Men, women, doesn't matter the color of your skin. Pick up a book, research and start learning.
I mean, there's real ones and then there's fake ones, no matter what, right? So that's kind of the thing. Like virtue signaling is just like another version of that for me, right? Like when of course people can have an opinion. Who really matters in the conversation is people taking action and rallying the community and trying to make actual change, right? And that whether you're failing or you're progressing at that, right, can be up for debate. But at least the attempt shows me you're a real one, right? Like everybody can talk some shit, but not everybody can actually take the investment of their time to move an agenda forward, right? And you know who's about them and who's about what their benefit of it is or like how they're gonna look very immediately in just the actions that they take. So yeah, I mean, I agree. Like there's a lot of people just out there criticizing whatever, but one thing again, like during the pandemic that really came to mind and just again working for this huge company like trying to maneuver, because a lot of people are very critical of this company too, like because they are very virtuous and they have like invested in financially in the past. Um, was that like you're just never going to please everybody, but you just got to keep being true to yourself and really continuing investing and really taking the actions that matter. Because if you do that, at least you're covered there, right? At least like you're continuing on your quest. You cannot move at the whim of everybody's opinion. You will drive yourself crazy.
So
You will go
true.
nuts. You're gonna go
So true.
nuts, right? Like, and we all make mistakes too. So not every move is great,
So true. So
but at
true.
least you're moving. That's the key in
So
investing
true.
time and
So
energy.
true. We before we get out of here, we talk about media, social media, and I really want to focus on the media lens as far as podcasting. We use it as a tool, right? Some people use it as a resource. Some people use it just to, I always say, regurgitate other people's talking points. Not everybody you can put a mic in front of their face because some people just don't know what to say, what to do, right? It's a lot of work. You both know, we
It's
both
a
know
lot of
this.
work. Yeah,
It's a
people
lot
don't
of work.
realize that.
I hear people saying, "Oh, I want to start a podcast." Okay, go ahead, start it. But I'm telling you right now, I'm doing this 6.5. There's people that do this 3 episodes and they quit because they
Yeah.
see what has to go between it. You know what I mean? But how have you used this to amplify your voice? Speak to the people that want to get into it to amplify their voice. And what is one thing you think men and women are doing as a mistake?
That's a lot of great questions. You know, I was on Sirius XM for a long time in New York when I was in New York in my career, and I was like a rock DJ, like 7 days a week, literally. Like, and it was kind of the OG, like it was like the OG podcasting in some ways, because it's like we didn't have any rules, we weren't like as concerned with FTC guidelines, right? Like we're just saying whatever the hell we want, but then talking about music too. But you're building your audience, building a community, and I mean, literally, it was like email me a song you want to hear. Like this is how long ago it was. And then the next day I'd be like, okay, I got your song on, right? So you were building through that, and social media actually was a big aid to my time there, because at least they could be like, "Hey, I want to hear this song tomorrow," and I could see it immediately, right, through Facebook, or I could post a video or whatever. But I would say, like, starting in satellite radio was interesting because I had this weird audience that was already there, which the music that I liked at the time, and I was in a band and I was living the lifestyle, was there, but I was also working, nobody knew, like also a full-time job working for Fader. And I was
Okay.
working at Fader and Cornerstone on the creative agency side for a long time, making my real check and getting my insurance. So, as a because you're doing this, right? Like people don't know all the pieces that bring you together, but that was
They
for two
don't.
very conflicting audiences, right? So when I got into like, interviewing more hip hop artists and kind of being just more of a general host, right? That was an interesting kind of transition because my audience was like a little bit of everywhere, right? And people were like, we don't get this. We don't understand this girl, right? Um, so the ability to kind of like define who I am and control the narrative through podcasting once my career at Sirius ended was really appealing to me, because I was already over talking about music at that point. I was like, I want to talk about, amazing women and talk about like just like my lifestyle in New York City, and like, a bit of like a Sex in the City type podcast, right? And until then, until podcasting really popped off, you had to wait for someone to give you that opportunity. You couldn't
Talk
create
about it.
on your
Yeah.
own. You were writing a blog, right? I had a blog called Fox Talk, a very long time ago. But we had a blog, and I was like, there's a way I can control the narrative. I'm going to try to do it, right? And podcasting really unlocked that ability for people like me, like you, whomever, right? In some good ways and some bad ways, because we'll talk about what's bad in a
What's
little
bad
bit.
then? What would you
Yeah.
say is bad?
I mean, just every asshole has opinion. Unless you really can do this shit, don't do it. It's a waste of
Talk
time.
about it.
Clutter
Yeah.
of the marketplace.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, really, it's like I get what you're saying completely. Like, I'm guilty of that. Like, I was very consistent, and then I'm like, oh my god, a billion things come up, and then I'm like, I'm banking episodes. Nobody knows I have like 4 podcasts that are going to come out, but
Welcome to
it's
the
like,
club.
yo, you don't have. People don't realize these are time-consuming things. Like it requires your weekends. It requires you maybe not going out a few nights a week, right? Like editing, I've paid people to do it now because I'm just like, I don't have the time. Like I'm working a full time job, right? People forget about the aspects of production that actually need to be produced. They just want to see you talking and then don't care how that actually came here, right? Like, so it was tough. But like getting into the podcasting game, I've done about like 7 podcasts at this point, and I've produced some of them are music podcasts, you know, women centric podcasts. I'm doing Everything's Political, which is like basically talking about the politics of life, but I really try to lean in on people who are either running for office or working in the nonprofit world and really talk to them about what are their motivations, right? Because people think that these careers are like they're illustrious to people. We elect officials, we don't understand what they do. Like what, you know? Okay, cool. Like not everybody, but some people are educated, very educated. But some people are just like, okay, like it's cool to understand. Like, what does a comptroller do? What does the DA do? Right? Like, I've learned a lot through this, right? Like, you get a lot of that nuance. So, what's cool is that with you can grow with podcasting versus, you know, other mediums. You're in your box, you stay there, right? Imagine like, you know, you're I don't know, like you know, you're hosting the Breakfast Club every morning, right? You can delve into other areas, but you're still centered around music and culture, right? And a specific kind of culture. But with podcasting, you could take any like little micro community or anything that you want to talk about and really deep dive on it. And I think that that's really cool and it allows people to be more intellectual and think through those things when they're good. But when
No,
they're
when they're
not
good.
good, it's bad, right?
Oh, of
Like,
course. And we know we like I don't I always champion the people that are doing the right things. Like have a podcast, yes. Work your magic. You're gonna have ups and downs. I've lost audio, I've lost video, right? I've
totally.
completely disintegrated one episode that I had to go on Fiverr with a guy and he's like, I can get you back that. And I had to realize it's like everything has a coding to it. So it's like it's not technically lost. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
still there. And you know, you have to list I look at the ones now that are the baby boomers, right? And you see the people, and this I know people are gonna get offended when I'm about to say here, want to create a show, but I know that they're not doing it for all the right reasons because they want that vanity metrics, they want that
Sure.
clout, they want those clicks, they think they want that viral moment. Heck, viral is not the end all be all, right? I always say it's having that continuous progression,
It's
right, to level
consistency
it up.
that's key. Yeah,
You see what I'm
consistency is
saying?
the real key. Yeah, for sure.
Right? And a lot of people think it's just that easy. It's like, oh, well, you're a podcaster. All you do is interview people. I'm sick and tired of hearing that when I get into talking points because some
Mm.
people think about it when you're in a conversation with them. Oh, you're interviewing me. I hear it all the time. And I'm like, no, I'm not interviewing you. It's just because I'm so quick on the ball to have an answer.
No, but also you're right. I think that people don't understand that interviewing is not just like a list of questions. Like I could tell that you don't come and you have like, oh my God, I must ask this question. Here's the thing. Like we're having a conversation, but you have an aim of what we want to talk about, right? And not everybody gets that. And I mean, I'm incredible at it because I've been doing it for 15 years, right? But also it helps me a lot as an executive because it's like, how many people do you think I talk to a day? Like,
A
oh, I
lot.
spent a whole day interviewing people, talking to people, trying to get information out of people, right? Same skill. I've come to find out. I actually wrote I wrote a piece for Adweek about this. How like you know you pivot your creativity in different ways, but same skill. And if anything, I'll say this: running teams, being visible in a high profile company has made me better at this than even when I was a journalist because you can't fuck up anymore or you can't edit that out. Right? Like you're literally the voice. And if one thing is said differently or wrong, like people will take it any way possible. Right. So it's interesting. It's like you evolve, you take these things to your career, but respect because in like interviewing anybody can put a list of questions together. It's a different thing to really be a humanist and get those narratives and those stories out of people.
Talk about that. And that's why I say there's some guys and some gals that are out there that are legendary at this. And
Yeah.
it's not even in the mainstream. Some of them are on our regular podcast. You know what I mean? And you see it. And it's like conversation again last night. It's like you see some people get these deals and you're like, well, you talk about raunchy material all the time, but then people are gravitating to you. And you got to ask yourself is why are they championing her? But then the ones that should be getting the championship or getting the acknowledgement are the ones that are not getting the acknowledgement. And then you got to think, is it
That's the business.
selective? That's the business.
That's the
That's the
business part.
political aspect of it. You know what I mean?
It's
But
unfortunate because you're right, there's many talented people. There's people sometimes, I mean, even like you know, it's interesting in gaming because you hire a lot of people for the jobs that are also talent, right? Who can host things on Twitch, who can do these things. And sometimes I'm like, man, these people are incredibly talented, right? As hosts. Like I'll watch them as somebody who's done this for like 20 years, right? Like a long time. And I'll be like, you don't have any training in journalism or whatever. You literally just started streaming on your computer and you can move a conversation along like on the fly talk about things and I'm like you don't understand how like actually incredibly talented you are, right? I see it in you and I'm like keep going, let's go, you're crushing it. But it's really cool to see that also kind of take shape. And it's also like kind of depressing because it's like we spent so much time investing in like being a good journalist and fact checking and all the shit, and then you're like these kids just get on here and they're like boom boom boom, right? They're just raised in a different through a different
Yeah.
lens.
I say with my development, it's always been through retail. All right. Never was the biggest talker. But when I worked in my past with Apple, it was a whole different ball game.
Oh yeah.
So when customers came in, and then you go into from that to telecommunications, from telecommunications to what I'm doing right now, it's interesting. And then you see where the envious starts happening. The
Yeah.
envy starts happening because you know how to correlate a conversation. I can have a conversation with anybody at the end of the day. As long as
Same.
I know that they're open and they're engaged, we're good. But if you're just kind of like, oh, how's your day today? And you're like, it's going well, or it's just going, I just know this. Okay, I'm gonna halt that conversation right there. You know what I mean? And that's in
Yeah.
the retail world because it's like that person does not want to be disturbed. They're probably mad that they had to come to the mall or go to do this, do this. They probably woke
Were
up.
you a
They probably
manager?
got a
Were you a retail manager?
Here's what I'll say is no, but this is what I'll say is the title doesn't build who you are. You don't need a
Oh no,
title
no,
to
no,
become a
no.
manager.
Boo, I
You know what I
worked in
mean?
retail too. You like you got to work in retail. You got to work in a restaurant. You got to work at a bar to know human behavior. Honestly, you learn a
Absolutely.
lot. You're manipulating. You're constantly manipulating and trying to figure out based off of like you're right. Person's
For sure.
mood, where they're at. Emotional intelligence is built in retail
And it's
careers.
not even there, I swear. Sometimes emotional intelligence is not even there. And that's the reason why I feel like AI is coming in here now and just taking over the world.
Taking it away
You know
from
what I mean?
us, right?
Of course. Hey, listen, I, last time I seen this, it was like AI is probably going to start replacing me very soon. I could probably just have me and you do a podcast and we're both an AI simulator. You know
Totally.
what I mean?
It will
Crazy.
it'll take inferences of my attitude, but it's never ready for what I got to say.
Ah, I love that. I love that.
I don't fear AI. Some people are like, "Oh my god." I'm like, "Yo, let's use it to let's make life easier, not harder, right?" Like if we can streamline some work, I'll take it. I'll take it cuz I ultimately AI is working for humans, right? Like and it's how we leverage it and how we use it that will also distinguish in the next few years like who can really kind of get to the next stage of their career because AI is going to be integrated into a lot of things that we're doing. And if you embrace it, I think that can really accelerate you. If you don't embrace it, then
The
it
only,
just you're gonna fall behind because it's gonna be
yeah,
integrated into more that we're doing for sure.
yeah. My only problem that I think with AI, and I think this is how I want to close it out, I think this is that defining moment, is how AI is going to impact the music career.
Oh yeah, for
Because
sure.
I'm starting to see AI Drake, and I'm like, AI Drake, and I'm a Drake guy, but AI Drake out here sounding better than like the real life Drake. Like, Aubrey, what's going on? How do you
Yeah.
feel about AI and music? You think there's
Oof.
going to
I
be
mean,
some?
let me be real. I've been in many recording sessions. I've worked with many rappers in my career. The AI sounds much better than half of them for
Whew.
real. So it'll be they're already, since auto tune, right? Since some of these other kind of AI-esque, qualities or functions have been used to kind of like accelerate the quality of shit, right? I think it's already kind of been there, right? It's already kind of been bubbling up. It's not going to take away from the art of somebody becoming an artist, right? Like that's one of the things that you can't change about music, which I think is incredible, right? Like you fall in love not only with the music itself, but the person now and what they are and who they are. So like I think it can also help certain things because this is interesting. This came up years ago when I was working at Atlantic Records and we were talking about radio liners and how artists just generally hate doing that. Like, hey, you're listening to the buzz such and such 9.5. Like, where the music lives or whatever. Like, they hate doing that, right? So we were saying, hey, can we just put the prompts in from each of the stations and like write out the script, use the artist's voice to create these so you guys have it, but it doesn't take any time out of their day, or maybe they just record a few things and then AI can pull from there. Because at that time, voice technology was kind of like getting to that place, right? And this was 2019, 2020. So it's not that long ago, right? That felt like a real practical application of AI for me, for an artist, right? Let's not waste your time on things you don't want to actually do, but the fans want, right? And it's those kind of things where I think like if we look at it through that lens and not through like just their music, like the music piece of like reinterpreting Drake or getting a better Drake, right? Like it'll be interesting to see how people lean in more into that, because those are the optimizations as functional people that we need, not changing their voice completely or taking a run with it. Like, and honestly, artists are already doing a lot of that. They are. They're not vocal with it. Like, don't think that what you hear is always the artist singing it in the back. Like some artists purists, but like very few these days. Um,
It's like a lot of
that's
copy
my
and
music
paste.
industry nerd, actually.
It's like a copy and paste. So they take this section here, put it there, put that section there, put it there,
Yeah,
and
they
put
call it
that other
chopped and
section
screw.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no,
I
and
mean,
it does
I'm an
make sense.
artist. Like, I got it. Like, I mean, it's great. You couldn't do that. Led Zeppelin, you were one take done in the studio, right?
Mm.
Like, think about that. Like, it's been creeping this way, but it's how we use it to our benefit. Like, I do think it's a danger to some artists, but we can't tell the future. We're just gonna have to let the machine tell us what's gonna come.
Gonna protect their craft. That's what they got to do, right? Perfect and predict their craft. You know, one thing I want to say, because I do appreciate you, I do appreciate the conversation. Before we get you to plug your credentials, things like that, where people can check out the podcast and all that, I have a question to ask you, and you got to give it to me. Top five, top five, top five, top five. There's a game that came out recently, WWE
Oh, okay.
2K23.
God.
So my
Okay.
question to you is going to be this: give me your top five wrestlers of all time.
Oh my god. I mean, I'm not that hard of a fan. That's of all time. That's pretty hard.
Top five of all time, or I can
God
narrow it down to top
damn.
three.
I don't really have a list of top wrestlers. I like am not like a huge like I'm not like a hardcore WWE. I know I've like the Undertaker, obviously, like is a
So that's
boss,
one.
right? What? I do like The Rock. I'm not gonna play. Like
That's
I do
two.
like him. Dave Bautista is a boss. He's Filipino, so I got to rep.
I didn't even know that. Wow.
He's half Filipino, half Greek. Yeah,
Damn.
yeah. And he's got an incredible career. You talk about someone who really committed to like changing his career. Oof. Lita Ford. Is it Lita Ford? No. Lita. The Lita Ford's the artist. Lita. She's like a
Lita, yeah.
hip-hop
Matt
chick.
Jeff
Yeah,
Hardy.
yeah,
I
yeah.
know, I know. So you got four.
Um,
Okay. Who else?
you know what I gotta say? Like, and I have kind of taken a break from even like investing in the wrestling world until I restarted this job. Um, but I think Rhea Ripley's kind of a badass. Like, she's
Let's
her body
go. Let's
incredible. I'm
go.
like, damn,
Thank you for
her,
saying that.
her arms and back are like goals, but she was incredible. I mean, like, Rey Mysterio's son, the whole like drama at WrestleMania, that was so funny to me.
It
And
was
then that's like her
crazy.
man's. It's like a whole funny like breakdown. But she's kind of badass. I was like, damn, like she's a pretty dank wrestler. Um, I don't know. Maybe that's five up there, but
Yeah. You gave us a five.
American Nightmare, like Cody
Oh
Rhodes. Yeah,
boy. All right.
he's
So here we
cool.
go,
And
ladies
I
and
always love
gentlemen.
Roman Reigns because I think he's one of the most beautiful men on
See,
earth.
so you're about to say, see, we're about to have a little
Well,
we're
he's
gonna
just
have a little
hot.
argument.
Like, this is me speaking purely from a woman's point of view, who is a heterosexual woman. Roman Reigns is a very nice man to look at.
I'm in a group chat. It's so funny you say that because there's a group chat that's on Twitter. It's a wrestling group chat. Shout outs to them. Oh, I think there's a couple females in there that said the exact same thing about
I
Roman.
mean, people hate Roman Reigns as a
I
wrestler,
don't see
right?
why not. Bro. I disliked him at one point, but now that whole bloodline, the gimmick, man, tribal chief, head of the table. Come on,
Yeah. I mean, but he's very nice on the eyes. I'll say that much.
and he can talk. Underrated, like talking. Like some of his interviews are just next level.
Yeah.
So you got to
I
give
mean,
a
he's
shout
been
out
around
to
for
him.
a long time too. He's been around for
Yeah,
a while. But he
for
looks
sure.
great. I mean, listen, Polynesian baby. They can never tell how old we are. They always think we're young.
That's the thing. I know. Because you surprised when you say you were what in your 30s. I'm in
I'm
my
gonna be
30s. It's
40.
like
Actually, I'm gonna be 40 this year.
what?
Yes.
40 going on 22. Stop it.
It's the Filipino blood. Thanks.
Hey, it's all good. It's all good. And I'm 39, going on 40 next year.
There you go.
So yeah, 40 years WrestleMania.
We're all making it.
Of course. Where can everybody check you out? All the fun things, the podcast, more importantly, and all that good stuff.
You can find me at Zeena Koda everywhere. ZeeNaKoda. Every platform I got that unlocked. That's the one thing about having a unique name. Really trying to spend a little more time on TikTok. Been on mom talk, like pregnancy talk, which is kind of funny. Like again, interesting to talk about things I never talked about in a public forum before, but that's definitely a driver for me. Yeah, you can find me there. And then everything political is the podcast. You can find all of the links for any of my podcasts through at Zeena Koda.
I love that. I love that. I do appreciate you once again.
Of course, thank you for having me.